Chapter 33 to 34. Harry had to return to his room to get more quartz from his backpack, or at least that's what he told Jean when he left and returned a few minutes later. She was both surprised and a little skeptical that Harry's powers worked by just absorbing specific things for specific effects. Harry didn't mind doubts. If he did, he certainly wouldn't have granted a wish in the kitchen, since using a single smoky quartz for something like that was pretty big. He already figured out how to rationalize it to those who asked deeper questions, but the truth was, his cover was specifically for enemies, so if his friends had suspicions, that would be fine as long as they didn't openly share them with outsiders. Harry never had any real intention of holding back while training, he just wanted others to think his powers had a high cost to use, and since it really didn't require that much effort to create such a ruse, it was worth it. To Harry, it was just a very long-term prank. He wondered which of the X-Men would figure it out first. His money was on Logan, but the man looked like he knew a thing or two about keeping secrets close to the vest, so even if he figured it out, he likely wouldn't bring it up, so Harry wouldn't know if he figured it out first or not. Jean spent her time enjoying the quiet of Harry's mind and reading on Clemency. The book wasn't simply words, it was Harry's own understanding of the practice, perfectly organized for assimilation by others telepaths, making a few pages more informative than hours of lectures and personal studies. 10 minutes into her reading she realized Harry's thoughts hadn't echoed in the library since she started, which made her ask, "Harry, can you control which thoughts can be heard by telepaths in your mind?" Harry left Jean's mind and answered back, "That's right. There is actually a book in the library that constantly updates itself with my thoughts, which is also the practice I use to lock away my thoughts from others by having them written out instead of voiced aloud inside my head. However, when I choose to, my thoughts can echo through the library as well." After considering this for a moment, she smacked Harry's shoulder, which he responded to by giving a fake hurt look. She said, "That's for saying I was peeping earlier. It isn't peeping if the person allows you to peep." Harry asked innocently, "So if you allowed me to see you undress, it wouldn't be peeping if I didn't ask permission first?" Jean smacked his shoulder again and turned slightly to hide her blush before stating, "You are not allowed to peep on myself or anyone undressing." Harry added, "Without permission." Jean tried to change the subject and turn her own embarrassment back on him. "So, can my library card be used to find the book with your thoughts or your memories? Maybe find a girlfriend or childhood sweetheart?" Harry shamelessly said, "That's right, and feel free to do so. I only ask that you not share with others anything you find." I was just joking." Harry said, "My library card actually can't be taken by someone who means me harm, so the fact that you could take it means you can be trusted with any info you find inside my head. There are some restricted pieces that contain secrets that wouldn't do any good to get out, which are kept locked away, but memories and thoughts are not among them." Harry wasn't lying either. His thoughts and plans to gain Jean's trust so he could remove the blocks on her mind were all in one of the books. If she decided to pick it up and read it, she'd know his plans. Harry was curious as to her reactions if she decided to do so, but wasn't worried as he had no ill intentions against her, and Jean learning directly from him about the blocks in a way she knew he couldn't be lying to her would save him a lot of time. He doubted she would though. Harry came off as a pervert, so free access to his deepest thoughts would not be a priority for the young telepath when she would rather be spending her time looking over the books on mental arts she now had free access to. Jean said with just a slight tease to her voice, "Maybe later." Harry shrugged and said, "When you're done with those books, I recommend this one." One of the books on the shelves flew out and over to the table in the reading area Jean had found a comfortable seat in. Harry continued, "It was written by the master of the temple I was at for the last 2 years and one of the best guides for astral creation. She is so skilled, she can push a person's astral form directly out of their body and even drag it through different dimensions." Jean asked, "Your master was a telepath?" "Wait, your master was a woman?" "No and yes. All minds have the potential for psionics, mutants such as yourself and the professor just have a head start in the art. As for my master, if possible I'll let you meet her one day. Separating your astral form from your body was difficult even for those who had mastered magic, as it was a psionic ability rather than a magic one, but for another to be able to separate your sense of self directly from your body required a far higher level of mastery." Jean went back to reading and Harry grabbed another large piece of quartz and put it in his inventory before taking another dive into Jean's mind. When asked how that worked, he basically answered that each piece could allow for a single use of access to specific energies, but as long as it was a continuous use, one crystal was all that was required. He was pretty sure at some point Jean would call BS and look for the book Harry kept the knowledge of his abilities in, but for now he'd keep up the charade. His money was still on Logan figuring it out first though. From what he could see while looking through her head, memories of Forget-Me-Not were like objects with a frictionless surface. If on the floor, they would remain there, but a single jolt in any direction would cause them to quickly slide away. The harder you tried to hold onto them, the faster they left, like gripping a glass egg with wet, soapy hands. A part of Jean's skilled mind tried to gently hold only her recollection of Forget-Me-Not, but it still slipped through the cracks. After an hour, Jean's mind had nearly forgotten why she had let Harry in, so he had to remind her. What was concerning was that each time she was reminded, the memories she previously had of him didn't return. She only remembered him when reminded because there were memories of him that were inactive, and once activated, she figured out the rest. However, when she forgot, she also forgot the activated memories. This meant that the more she remembered him, the more of him she forgot. Harry asked and got permission to copy any uncovered memories she had of him so they could be returned to her later. Thankfully, having a piece of Forget-Me-Not in Harry's inventory acted like a tether, so his own memories of Forget-Me-Not were not slipping away. He was tempted to see what would happen if he removed the hair, but the worst-case scenario was that he would instantly lose every memory of Forget-Me-Not, and from what Harry could discern, any memory he lost of his roommate would be unrecoverable. That wasn't acceptable, so he would rely on Jean to do the necessary testing. She was alright with that as long as Harry returned to her a copy of any memory she lost during the tests. While observing her, Harry did his best to, and from what he could sense, succeed in hiding his own awkwardness from Jean. Other than Hermione, this was the closet he'd ever really gotten to a girl around his own age, and this was the first time he'd done so since his hormones started acting up. Though hundreds of years spent in the tutorial and paused helped his mentality mature, it had little effect on his biology, and if caught off guard he'd still blush the same as Jean would do every so often. While shifting around through her mind, he would have to fight his own impulses to look at her thoughts about him, as she could sense what he was doing in the same way he could sense her. Their proximity to each other, the fact that she smelled good, and how beautiful she looked while blushing weren't helping the situation at all. On the matter of the mental blocks, Harry had discovered a few hints as to their nature, but nothing obvious. It reminded Harry of what he did with his own mind, in that the space was rearranged so that certain pieces of information couldn't be accessed without unfolding the space into a maze first. Without prior experience in doing so, Harry wouldn't have noticed the telltale signs of folded space within Jean's mind. However, that means he couldn't have a good look at the blocks without first figuring out how to safely unfold the space. From an outside observer's perspective, both Harry and Jean were in the mansion's library reading a book, though neither would turn the pages. However, neither were unaware of their surroundings, and when three students entered the library, they both looked up to find the identities of the new arrivals. Two Harry recognized, the sunglasses-wearing teen he met the previous night and the no longer pink-haired demon teleporter. The third was an older pink-haired girl with bone-like plates framing her face as well as spikes coming from her back. Jean looked up from her book and said, "Hey Scott, looking for me?" The teen with the red sunglasses took a quick look at Harry, which made him seem like he was struggling not to frown. He answered back, "Yeah, someone ordered a whole buffet or something and there are still leftovers in the kitchen." The older pink-haired teen said, "No one ordered it, Scott. I heard some new kid made it appear, like magic." Scott said, "Look, there's no way dash." Harry interrupted, "Ah, that was me. I was playing around and overdid it a little." The pink-haired girl took another look at Harry and said, "You're the new kid." "Well, I'm Sarah, nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too, I'm Harry." "Well Harry, what are you doing spending your first day here in the library?" she asked. "Ah, there is a project I really need help with and Jean was nice enough to assist me." Sarah raised an eyebrow and asked skeptically, "Homework during summer on your first day here?" "Not homework, a special project. I'm calling it Operation Don't Forget. It has to deal with how some things are forgotten easily while others are not. There's a lot of psychology involved, and when I begged on my hands and knees for assistance, Jean agreed to help out." Jean gave a half smile at the explanation. Harry wasn't lying about the project, but he was leaving a number of things out. Sarah nodded and said, "Well, make sure to treat out little Marvel Girl right or there will be consequences." Harry looked over at Jean and smirked, "Marvel Girl?" Jean let her head fall down to the table in embarrassment, which caused Harry's smirk to turn into a grin and caused Sarah to giggle a bit. Sarah said, "That's right, we're all very protective of Marvel Girl, especially Scott here." Before Scott could say anything, Kurt said, "It's true, you should see him every time she gets hurt in the simulation." Kurt dramatically rose his hand into the air, looking off into the distance, and theatrically cried out, "Gian." Harry met Scott's gaze with an amused look, causing the laser-eyed teen to look down slightly. He took a breath and looked back up before saying, "Look, I'm sorry about yesterday. I can't deny that I overreacted when you were just testing us. It's just..." He looked over at Jean, who was now waiting with a half smirk as well for him to continue his explanation. Scott let out another sigh before continuing, Jean and I have both been in the institute for years. Most come into their powers around their teens, but we both have had them for far longer and we were the youngest here when we arrived. She's isn't just a team member to me, alright, she's family. Jean gave him a soft look before hardening it and saying to Harry, and though I've grown up quite a bit since I arrived here, Scott still tends to treat me like I'm still a helpless little girl even though I am fully capable of looking after myself and kicking his ass. Scott looked part offended and part appalled at the language, though Sarah and Kurt both laughed, with the latter saying, "Ja, it's true." Harry added his 2 cents, so the knight in shining sunglasses still seeks to save the fair princess. This got a few giggles from the girls and caused Kurt to start laughing. Before Scott could say otherwise, Harry said, "Jean, perhaps you should dress in a leather biker chick's outfit so he no longer considers you a princess to be rescued." Sarah and Kurt erupted into full-blown laughter and Jean tried to glare at Harry, but stifling her own laughter while doing so didn't make it a very effective glare. Scott seemed to realize there wasn't a way to defend himself, so he gave up on that and asked Harry, "Look, are we okay?" Harry could tell this was the type of guy who just wanted to be helpful to others. Harry did too, but in truth, that was more of just a hobby he enjoyed, like playing video games. Scott, however, was different. He emotionally invested himself into others. This would make him a good leader in the future, but it also meant that if he was betrayed by someone he had absolute trust in, he wouldn't take it well. Harry decided to file that obvious foreshadow away for later. Harry held out his hand for Scott to take, and when he took it, Harry said, "No problem. If you have time later we can spar if you want. Your power is nice for long-distance attacks, but you'll definitely want some CQC skills to fall back on." Jean asked, "CQC?" Scott answered, "Close quarters combat." Though I didn't know anyone besides Logan used that term. He told me the same thing, by the way. I can't believe you held your own against him. Harry shook his head. "Oh, I didn't. That guy was holding back a lot. I mean, he didn't even use his claws until I had him chained down. Last guy I fought with that much skill nearly vaporized me." Kurt frowned and said, "Guys like you remind me that the phrase, 'may you live in interesting times,' is actually a curse." "And how did you make that food and turn me pink?" Scott asked. "Wait, you're the one who turned Kurt pink." "It was a reflex. I was minding my own business, then this scary blue dude pops out of nowhere and terrifies me." Kurt half shouted, "You liar. You weren't scared, you flicked my forehead the moment I appeared. Then you took something from your pocket and turned my precious hair pink." Harry threateningly said, "Did what I took out from my pocket look like this?" while reaching into his pocket. The blue demon popped away in another puff of brimstone smoke and, from what Harry could tell, reappeared behind a nearby wall where he could still listen in. Harry said, "Oh, never mind, I don't have any smoky quartz left on me." "Oh well." Scott's frown could be seen beneath his sunglasses and he asked, "How does your power work?" Jean quickly repeated back what Harry told her earlier. Harry can absorb things which grant temporary effects like increased strength or access to energies he can use to perform magic-like feats. Harry wasn't sure she bought it, but it was nice that she was helping him keep his cover since the others were more likely to believe it coming from her than him. Scott asked, "What kind of things?" Harry answered this time, "Quartz gives me access to psionic energy which lets me do things similar to Jean until I release the connection. Smoky quartz lets me do somewhat random and unstable things and I can't guarantee the outcome or consequences. I used smoky quartz to teleport last night, turn Kurt pink, and conjured an assortment of food. I'm not entirely sure where the food came from though, and I may have accidentally stolen it from somewhere." Scott asked in just a slightly higher pitch of voice, "So we've all become accessories to theft?" Harry said, "Doubt it. If I hear news of a theft I'll make sure they're compensated, but I don't even know when then food came from, much less where. It could have all been made in different parts of the world at different times for all I know." Scott shook his head and said, Just don't do that again, alright?" "No problem. I'll make it myself next time." Harry felt another area of space cave in close to him and paused again. Harry approximated where the blue demon was likely to reappear and unpaused while moving his hand to the space to his side. Kurt once more reappeared in a puff of blue brimstone-smelling smoke just as Harry's hand stopped in front of him and flicked his forehead again. "Ow, that for?" he asked, slipping a bit into his German accent. "Sorry, still a reflex." Kurt rolled his eyes and asked, "Are you good in the kitchen?" Harry said, "I'm good in a lot of places, but yes, I can cook." From the looks on their faces, Scott and Kurt hadn't caught onto the double meaning, but from the way Sarah smirked and Jean turned away, Harry figured they both understood. Kurt said, "Excellent, then you can take my next shift and make lunch tomorrow. Harry said, sure, and if anything horrible happens to those who eat lunch, I'm sure people won't come after you in retaliation. Kurt considered it and said, on second thought, I'll go ahead and make lunch tomorrow. Sarah asked, so Harry, are you a nerd, a jock, or a pervert? Harry gave a mock thoughtful expression and asked, do I have to choose just one? Kurt said, mean, he is a prankster. I would recognize one of my own anywhere. Harry said, guilty. Kurt leaned over to Harry and gave a conspiratorial stage whisper, there are things we must discuss later. And then leaned out and gave a wink as if none of the others heard what he just told Harry. Harry gave a sagely nod which sent a shiver up the spine of Scott and Sarah. Jean, for some reason, was looking forward to it. Kurt, Sarah, and Scott took a seat and started talking about the institute and themselves while asking Harry questions. Kurt asked, how could you live in a temple for 2 years? I would be bored out of my mind in 2 hours. Harry knew what he meant and said, yeah, no one there would have appreciated a good prank, so I have to lay low. The head of the temple did in fact have a sense of humor, but she was the figurehead and had to lead by example, so she couldn't express it outwardly. Jean asked, did you ever prank her? Harry's face scrunched up. Once. Kurt excitedly asked, oh, this I must hear. Harry sighed and said, I have access to certain materials with beyond standard properties. For simplicity's sake, we'll call them magic potions, and if you want I'll tell you more about them later. Now, the temple master is bald, so there was one time I served her some tea that had a little something extra inside so that the next morning she would wake up with a full head of hair. I saw her the next morning and she was still bald, so I figured it didn't work. I mean, magic potions aren't exactly what you would call reliable. Later that week I had tea with her again and she served it. The next day I woke up looking like a Wookiee. The moment that image came to everyone's mind, each of them started madly laughing. Scott had to hold his sunglasses to his face to make sure they didn't fall off, and it didn't take long for Sarah and Jean to have tears leaking from their eyes, while Kurt was literally on the floor, rolling around and laughing until he couldn't breathe. After they calmed down a bit, Harry said, I'm just a little regretful I ever told her where to buy stuff like that. Harry was grilled a bit more on the subject but passed it off as a small street in London filled with old, occult shops that either sold fake or real stuff, though that wasn't exactly what he said. He didn't lie, but he did give most of them the impression that it was just a slightly weird area, and not a hidden world. Harry wondered how long it would take for Jean to start looking through his memories for that. The group headed back to the kitchen to grab some of the remaining plates and saw Forge standing in a corner next to an open metal panel. When he saw Harry enter, he said, new guy, did you do this? Harry realized what he was talking about and said, yeah, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. Sarah said, wait, why was this a bad thing? Forge answered, the cameras and sensors fried the moment he did whatever he did. Forge had seen the video log which showed Harry taking out a large piece of smoky quartz, having the quartz glow, and then the feed died. Harry nodded, yeah. That form of energy isn't good around electronics, especially for feats that big. Forge frowned and said, magic? Hope you know what you're getting into playing with stuff like that. Harry asked, bad experience with magic? Forge took off a glove revealing a mechanical hand, and used it to knock on his opposite leg, revealing a metal sound. He said, that was that last time I used magic. New house rule, no summoning anything, got it? Harry's look of recognition let Forge know he figured out what happened, and Harry said, got it, no summoning anything. I promise. Forge nodded and said, good. He held his metal hand out for Harry to shake and he did so. I'm Jonathan Silvercloud, everyone calls me Forge though. When the semester starts I teach physical sciences. I hear you know your way around tech. Harry recognized the Native American name and nodded, yes, I'm Harry, and I can write an operating system blindfolded and can probably take apart anything in Dr. McCoy's lab and put it back together. Is that right? We'll see about that later. He closed the hatch and left. It seemed he had just finished. Kurt said, oh, you're so gonna get it. Harry asked, why is that? Sarah answered, Forge probably has one of the biggest egos on the planet, but not without good reason. You basically challenged him by saying you could take apart his tech. Scott continued, that, and he is the one who programs the danger room. Him and Logan are number 2 and 3 of the top 3 people you don't mess with here. Harry asked, and number 1? All 4 answered at the same time, Storm. Harry could easily imagine what a weather sorceress of her power would be capable of, so he didn't question it further. They each grabbed a plate and finished it while continuing their prior discussion. At one point Harry realized something and thought out loud to ask the question if the others knew that Jean couldn't control her powers and was hearing their thoughts as well. Jean gave a quick look at him and shook her head, showing a bit of anxiety. Harry thought that he had no intention of telling others, and as long as she didn't share the information she learned or use it against others, there was no real harm in them not knowing. Jean sent a telepathic message to Harry. It has only been the last couple months that my powers have gotten stronger and this started. They don't know and I thank you for not telling them. Harry thought out loud that it wasn't a problem, but privately he wondered if the phoenix granting him a part of its flame had affected Jean, boosting her own power due to the proximity. If that was the case, it would probably get stronger, which meant Harry had to help her control it faster and remove the blocks before they caused permanent damage to her growing psyche. He did ask if she would be able to reach his mind at night for more time to use his library to study mind arts. Turns out that her own bedroom wasn't too far from Harry's, so it was easy. Harry did his best to avoid the temptation of mentioning how they only knew each other for a day and were already planning ways to sneak into each other's rooms. Mentally at least. After dinner, Harry and Jean returned to the library and Scott, Kurt, and Sarah headed off to do their own thing. The study group assembled not long after, though was smaller than usual as most of its members went home for the summer. The current members included Bobby, Kitty, Soraya, and Josh, along with Jean. Kitty was a few years older, with Bobby being about the same age as Harry, while Soraya and Josh were both a few years younger. Bobby's parents didn't know he was a mutant, so he felt awkward around them, which was why he stayed. Kitty apparently picked up an cat-sized alien dragon when she went to space and brought it back, but her parents wouldn't let it come over, so she stayed at the mansion because she didn't want to leave it. Soraya was Muslim and wore a traditional hijab. She didn't have family and didn't speak of it further. Josh was a young mutant who could heal others, but a few months back he got badly injured and tried to heal himself. It worked, but his skin permanently turned gold in color, which made it difficult to walk around outside the mansion without a few hours of heavy makeup application. Jean was usually the head of the study group, but once they got started, Harry's scholar path got to work and his inner teacher smoothly took over. Jean didn't mind because he was doing well, and it gave her more time to spend looking through the books on mental arts in Harry's head. According to Harry's senses, Bobby's cells had a constant connection to a dimension that was similar to Ichthalon's but not the same one. There were countless dimensions after all, and Ichthalon's was not the only dimension of endless cold energy. That, however, meant that Bobby could use the equivalent of ice magic with the power of invocation without giving anything up in exchange. There was no reasonable limit either. If that dimension had no master, then Bobby could potentially channel all the energy of that dimension with enough effort. If there was no one to stop him, he could freeze the planet solid if he wanted to. Harry was quite glad he was a good guy. Harry decided to teach him everything there was to know about thermodynamics. Josh felt strange to Harry's senses. He was actually a bit similar to the energy Harry felt off the Philosopher's Stone, but also different. That matched what Josh told Harry about his abilities. Harry debated giving him some physical books on occlumency, since there was a possibility he could use his healing ability to reshape his own mind to practice the art. If he could, then it was possible to use occlumency to learn vast amounts of chemistry, biology, and human anatomy and physiology. A living Philosopher's Stone with such knowledge would be very interesting. Not even the Flamos knew everything their stone could do, after all. Kitty had an interesting power of physical intangibility. Unlike the few dimension-shifting forms of intangibility Harry knew of, hers allowed her to still see and hear things in this dimension while intangible, and she could even affect or be affected by some energies while intangible. She wanted to study engineering, and though Harry was a few years younger than her, she had no problem accepting his input. She used to be Dr. McCoy's assistant and knew her stuff, but it seemed there were some issues with her power and she was kind of a klutz, so after one too many dropped beakers or wrecking expensive equipment by accidental phasing into it, she was let go from that position. Harry didn't know Soraya's power and he didn't ask. Soraya wanted to study law, and though Harry mostly knew business law, he still knew enough criminal law to assist her. When it came to studies, Jean usually studied the mind, but that was more because of the influence of Professor Xavier and her own power than it was for a career. Everyone assumed she would go into the field of psychology, but just because she could go into the minds of others, didn't mean she liked to. Harry found this out while in her mind, but that was mostly because she let him see it. From within her mind, Harry directly said, "Jean, when you're done mastering mind arts, I'd recommend learning about physics, astrophysics, and astronomy." Within her mind echoed the question, "Oh, and why is that?" Learning about the mind will help you control your powers. Learning physics and astrophysics will teach you new ways to use them. And astronomy? Harry said, "A hunch. You'll need it." Harry didn't continue looking through Jean's mind to see what her answer would be. He gained all he needed for now on Forget-Me-Not's issue and couldn't do anything about the mental blocks until Jean gained the ability to unfold her own mind, which could take several months depending on how much effort she put into it. That day's study group went on far longer than normal due to the progress each made in their own subject, but eventually came to an end and they each returned to their rooms. On arrival, Harry noticed Forget-Me-Not go stiff and stare at him for a few moments. Harry said, "I still remember you, so relax." Forget-Me-Not let out a sigh and said, "Sorry. I've had others say they would remember me too." Harry wanted to tell him of his progress, but there wasn't much to speak of at the moment, so he said, "Can I have one more lock of your hair? I want to try a few things on it." Forget-Me-Not rolled his eyes and took the scissors from earlier and snipped a lock from the back of his head, which Harry took and set aside. Harry asked, "Are you a part of the second X-Men team that went into space?" Forget-Me-Not looked surprised and said, "Yeah, but I don't really want to talk about it." Harry figured the older mutant probably had as little experience talking to people about things as Harry did. Harry took the papers he wrote earlier out of his inventory along with a portkey box. He created a magic circle in the air above an empty dresser which expanded and contracted, giving Harry the numbers to write down for the space's magical coordinates. He wrote that down and set it in the portkey box before activating it, sending the box to the goblins. Harry? Yes, Forget-Me-Not? What was that? Paperwork. No, I mean the taking stuff out of midair thing, and the glowy circle thing, and the vanishing box thing. Oh. That's magic. Why? You know what? Forget I asked. 1 week after Harry's arrival, he got his first Danger Room session. That morning an armored truck had pulled up to the X-Mansion and delivered several crates of various sizes containing the supplies he asked the goblins to stage the manual delivery of. Setting up such a routine every other month or so would cement the weakness of his power to others watching him, and he had no doubt others were watching him. According to the goblins, there had been over a dozen checks into Harry's background done by various companies and several agencies since the open transfer of his funds from overseas to the States. However, by this point the goblins had had 4 years to create a background and 3 years to create the foundation of his company, so it all looked completely legitimate. The goblins even included several legal issues into the history of his company, which looked to be resolved later because a company with a history of legal issues was less suspicious than a company without them. There was a reason that the goblins put so much effort into working for Harry rather than just doing everything themselves with their own gold. Legally speaking, due to a large amount of treaties and agreements made in the past, goblins were not allowed to own land, interact with non-magicals, or work above ground in most areas. At the moment, they weren't breaking a single law. Although just a technicality, every land or business purchased was purchased only under Harry's name. The taxes were a nightmare, but it was perfectly legal. As for the other issues, they were solved by simply using computers or hiring muggleborns or squibs for direct interactions. One would think that it was possible for Harry to betray them, but the goblins had Harry sign a large amount of magical contracts which would pretty much end his life if he did so. Not that he would. Also, the contracts didn't prevent the goblins from trying to cheat him, which they would often make attempts to do, though Harry caught each one. When Harry was sent stacks of paperwork, he would just directly put it into his inventory and pause before going over it all, line by line, which was what saved him from a few of the more subtle technicalities and clauses they tried to sneak into some forms for him to sign. Harry knew that the goblins were not his friends, just business partners. One wrong move or misstep on Harry's part and he would practically become a magic-bound puppet to be used by the goblins, yet as long as he stayed a step ahead of them, he had a cutthroat workforce more cunning than any lawyer and more vicious than a shark who smelled blood in the water. It was just another battlefield for the goblins, and they enjoyed having a worthy opponent. The supplies Harry had delivered included a dozen small crates, each filled with 100 or so synthetic gemstones that were flat enough to stack with a shape similar to a full wallet in size. After use hover dollies to transport the crates to the danger room, Harry was immediately told to get out one of everything and head in for an examination of his base reading. Logan said into the speaker system, "All right, Brat, it's finally time to show us what you're made of." The audience included Professor Xavier, Forge, Logan, Dr. McCoy, and a few of the 3rd X-Men team including Scott, Jean, and Kurt. Ms. Monroe was noticeably absent as her attention was already completely wrapped in the book written by her ancestor that arrived with the rest of the materials. Logan said, "First, we're gonna get a base reading on you. So just go through the course." From what Harry learned from Forge, the danger room had 2 modes: obstacle course and combat simulator. The obstacle course was where random obstacles came out of the wall and floor and the students were expected to get through them while running laps around the large circular room. The combat simulator was a newer function they hadn't fully worked the bugs out of yet that made hard-light constructs to use as opponents. According to Forge, the alien ship Kitty and the second X-Men team returned to Earth on had a rudimentary hard-light system which is basically a combination of holograms and force fields. A force field was usually made to cover a surface and didn't move, but it was possible to create an enclosed space where a force field could be made in mid-air and moved around. This combined with a hologram made it look like one could create actual constructs. Of course the construct could not exist outside the danger room as an enclosed space was required for their existence, but it was a good way for those with lethal capabilities to test them without holding back. Harry ran 3 laps around the danger room while wearing a cursed ring he made. After learning more about the nature of wizard magic, Harry had delved deeper into making it his own and less chaotic, which led him to create more personalized spells and such. This curse was similar to the momentum-restricting equipment he had before, but far more efficient, and since it used his wizard magic, it was invisible to any form of energy sensing. The curse itself reduced Harry's physical stats to about 30 apiece, which for a soon-to-be 15-year-old was just about peak possible fitness. Logan let him have it on the obstacles as laser turrets, saw blades, and spikes came at him from every direction, forcing him to pause nearly every 3 seconds to check what new gizmo had popped out of the wall. He looked around while not paused of course, but that was more for show. Next was a test of Harry's heightened base. According to Harry's explanation of his abilities, absorbing a rare metal could increase his stats for a week, while absorbing a common metal would only increase them for an hour, and that these two effects stacked. The limit of how much he could increase his base rose with his fitness level. Harry absorbed some bars of platinum which were among the delivered items and reduced the effect of the curse from 90% reduction to 50% reduction, making his physical stats of STR and AGI about 150 apiece. Harry did the course once more, but the delay between the different obstacles popping up had been drastically reduced the moment Logan got an understanding of Harry's strength and speed. And last, but not least, Harry absorbed some pure iron bars and he removed the ring completely and showed off his base physique. The ring itself had a notice me not charm on it, so those watching didn't pay attention to the fact that he wore it or took it off. While watching Harry's third run from the observation deck, Xavier asked aloud, "How is he?" Logan answered gruffly, "Strength-wise he is about halfway between me and Sabretooth. His speed is closer to Sabretooth's than mine though. Although he has combat experience, from the way he handles himself, I'd say it's mostly one-on-one. He has little to no experience on a true battlefield." Xavier commented, "That is not surprising. He trained with others to control his power, but he doesn't appear to have experienced war, so there would be no reason for him to fight in a battlefield." Logan agreed with the second part, but not the first. He could always tell the difference between those who have killed and those who haven't. There was a fear of death in the eyes of those who have never taken a life and those who have never had someone try to take theirs. He could tell Harry had fought against people who wanted him dead and probably killed them. But he wouldn't say anything, that wasn't his business to share. Forge took over the speaker and said, "Alright, now we're gonna test those gems." "Wait. Harry, what are the fossils for?" The armored truck dropped off 12 small crates, 3 medium crates, and 2 large crates along with Aurora's book. The small crates had all been opened and contained the various palm-sized synthetic gemstones Harry used, while the large crates contained iron and one of the medium crates contained the platinum. The other 2 medium crates hadn't been opened. One of the 12 small crates however didn't contain gemstones, it contained fossils. Harry answered, "Those are Tyrannosaurus rex bone fossils. We should save their use for last." Forge was more than a little curious, but set it aside for now and activated the combat simulation. The room changed into what looked to be the interior of a large office building as the holograms set the stage and the hard light constructs filled out the room. A collective grimace appeared on the spectators' faces and Xavier asked, "Did it have to be this scenario? He's a bit young to face him." Forge smiled and said, "I'm sure the kid can take it." Harry moved through the rows of empty cubicles and a moment later, the elevator at the end of the hall dinged. The door slid open and out charged a man in a red and black costume riding a minigun-mounted pink unicorn. He shouted, "Bet you weren't expecting me, Muthafu ***********. Wait, did I just get bleeped? Ahem. You're with a chimichanga." Harry found himself far too stunned to acknowledge what he had said. The pink unicorn's saddle had 2 actual miniguns mounted to the sides and the red guy riding it had swords strapped to his back. "The fuck?" The strange man jumped off the unicorn and said, "Hey kids, I'm Deadpool. And this is Philip." The unicorn let out a growl and the miniguns started rotating. Harry grabbed a citron from his belt and had it glow before putting it in his inventory. Just as the minigun started firing, chains wrapped around the unicorn's neck and dragged him to the side, aligning his line of fire with Deadpool's back. The man's body partially exploded with a shower of gore and blood, and the unicorn was unable to get back up. From behind him, Harry heard someone shout, "You killed Kenny." Harry turned to see another Deadpool standing there, and to his side was a third who shouted, "You ba asterisk 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 asterisk." Wait, ba asterisk 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 gets censored? What the dash? Harry used a tourmaline to summon a bolt of heat and light which was sent through the copy's torso before he could finish his sentence. The copy next to him said, "Okay, playtime's over." He drew his sword and ran over to Harry, who pulled out and used a diamond and generated his eldritch heavy sword. Deadpool struck it a dozen times, but his sword bounced off, allowing Harry to use it as a shield with his title sword style. Each sweep of his weapon changed the layout of the office space, but Deadpool moved around like a monkey on a sugar high. Deadpool jumped back a few steps and shouted, "Get him, Philip." The gun-toting pink unicorn had freed itself from the chains and was revving its miniguns once more. Harry charged forward as the guns went off, using his heavy sword as a shield, though it was slowly whittled away as he got closer. The unicorn charged forward to meet Harry, who jumped to the side and bounced against a wall to face the unicorn once more, and with a clean slice the unicorn was bisected. Deadpool fell to his knees and shouted, "Philip." He then pulled two handguns from behind him and started unloading at Harry, who had to jump behind the adjacent desks for cover. Harry pulled out a ruby, and after making it glow and vanish, he started emitting red light as he channeled strength energy from Sidorak's realm. Harry charged forward through the desks as if they were made of air and tackled Deadpool to the ground before ripping off his arms. Deadpool looked to his left and right and said, "You know, I don't think this is the proper way to disarm someone." Harry headbutted him, which seemed to knock him out as the red glow faded. The elevator dinged once more. 4 more Deadpools came out of the elevator and started shooting Harry at the same time while arguing with each other over who was the most handsome. Harry decided to ignore their conversation and pulled out the dino fossil and put it in his inventory. Harry channeled his dragon chi, causing golden arcs of lightning to flash over his body. One of the Deadpools shouted, "He's going Super Saiyan. Kill him before he gets sued for copyright infringement." The bullets did nothing to Harry, who took a few moments to compose himself before moving faster than the eye could follow over to the group of Deadpools and smashing into one of them with all the force he could muster. The moment Harry's fist made contact, the hologram vanished and the projection flashed red with a message on the wall, "Error, error." There was also a 5-meter-tall dent in the wall a few feet in front of where Harry had punched, and sparks were coming from the scrap behind it. The message vanished and the danger room opened. Harry looked over at the group and asked, "Who the bloody hell was that?" Logan answered, "Deadpool. Mercenary who pops up in unexpected places and is troublesome to put down. I've seen him survive decapitation, so even if you beat him, expect him to return." Harry asked, "There's no way that he actually acts like that?" Scott shuddered and said, "No, it's completely accurate. I've seen him twice. He really does spout off endless nonsense which will throw anyone off if they listen to it." Forge was looking over the damage done to the danger room wall and asked, "Was that the dino bone?" Harry answered, "Yeah, sorry about that. I can see why you wanted to save that one for last. This will take a week to fix and another week to recalibrate. My system couldn't detect any energy readings off you, which made the sensors give conflicting data." Ping. New quest, Greater Danger, help Forge fix Danger Room, improve Danger Room with magic, help Danger Room evolve. The quest gave Harry some ideas, so he asked, "Can I help?" Forge looked like he was going to refuse, but after a moment of thought said, "All right, but if you mess around even once, there won't be a second time." "Got it?" "Of course," he answered. The following week returned Harry to routine, except he spent 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the evening helping Forge. One of Harry's goals in the past was to make his own room of requirements, but more recently he discovered that the core of the roar was a concentrated eye of magic, which was actually constructed using instructions from the Darkhold and was what gave birth the chaotic forces needed to make something so impossible. A side effect of this, however, was that Chthon could witness the contents of the roar and all within whenever he wanted. Harry had initially given up on making one, but with the quest he received, he was now considering the means of combining his half-finished roar with the technology of the Danger Room. The Danger Room systems were basically made of spaceship parts. The gravity generator could make the occupants feel like they were standing on a slope when they were upright, and the wiring, air conditioning, heater, and cooling system of the spaceship could be used to make lightning, fire, ice, and wind in the enclosed space. These combined with the hard light projections gave the Danger Room a lot of possibilities as a training space. However, there was much the Danger Room could not do. A lot of computing power had to be put into minute details such as the impact force of bullets to be both realistic and non-lethal to those who failed to dodge in time. Every twitch of the force field while being impacted had to be calculated, and even Forge's best computing system couldn't cope with multiple users fighting within, which was why the combat simulator could only be used for individuals, not groups. There was just not enough computing power. Harry wrote out a ward scheme which used the same systems as the current danger room but focused on control to handle a majority of the computations automatically. Basically, the magic would handle the tiny stuff and the mundane systems would doing the heavy lifting. The only issue was that Harry needed a way to allow the danger room to control the magic without a wizard directing it. He was looking through the software when he noticed something that stood out. Harry took the tablet he was using to look through the software over to Forge and asked, "What's with the AI in here?" Forge stopped assembling some replacement parts and said, "There's no AI in the danger room. The software can adapt, but it can't grow beyond its storage space." Harry said, "The time stamps on the program history shows the baseline reaction sensors have been updating irregularly. If you're not the one doing that, who is?" Forge grabbed the tablet and looked over the readings Harry noticed. A moment later he marched to the main terminal and looked for the same lines to confirm it wasn't a mistake. 5 minutes of browsing later and Forge shouted, "Damn it. I can't believe he would do this." Harry asked, "Who did what?" Forge answered, "There's a block in my head preventing me from noticing what you showed me. This AI has been here for a while, probably from the ship. All the systems that would show the AI's activities have been placed under hidden files, meaning you can only look for it passively, not actively. You'd never find it in here unless you already knew it was there. The only person who has the clearance needed to do this and place those blocks in my head is." Harry sighed. After a moment he said, "If I could figure out why he did it without raising suspicion, would you be willing to help?" Forge asked, "What did you have in mind?" After going over the plan, Forge got one of the professor's spare wheelchairs and Harry opened one of the 2 crates he hadn't opened earlier. They contained vibranium and adamantium. Forge looked over and said, "Mind if I buy some of this? There are a few projects I could really use it for." Harry considered it and said, "Only if you let me help you build it. I can swear on my magic not to steal your work, but I'd like to use it as a learning experience." Forge considered it. He was in fact one of, if not the most brilliant inventor on the planet, and personal lessons from him were not in fact inferior in value to the weight of these metals he wanted to use, so it was a fair deal. "Alright. But you don't need to swear not to use it, just ask permission and give me a cut if you make money off anything you learn from me." And with that they had a deal. Harry used some vibranium and etched it into the replacement wheelchair along with a long-term diagnosis spell. If the professor sat in the chair for a full day, it would give a complete framework of his mind. Forge was quite peeved that he had been manipulated to ignore an AI and had already created an interface to speak with it. The first thing Forge did was ask for forgiveness that he didn't notice it earlier. The AI was pretty pissed, but not at Forge, and when asked for forgiveness it was given without issue. According to her, and Forge was the one who declared it a she, the AI had sent a message to Xavier asking what she was not long after the assimilation of the spaceship into the danger room, and the professor decided to keep it under wraps. He typed in a core command to never harm the students, then locked her away beneath the software. The next day Harry sent a discreet spell at Xavier's chair and fried it without anyone being the wiser. Forge got out the replacement chair and said he'd have the old one fixed the following day. When they got the chair back, Harry looked over the diagnosis spell with Forge. Forge didn't use magic, but that was just preference. He certainly knew how to use it and could read of the diagnosis as well as Harry could. Both let out a depressed sigh at the results and weren't sure what to think. Danger, which is what the AI called itself, had been kept up to date on their plans and wanted to know what they found. Forge summarized it for her, and afterwards even she felt unsure about it. Xavier, it seemed, wanted to become a symbol that others could get behind. He had succeeded in that, without using his powers on others. Many politicians believed in him and stood behind him, which is what protected the X-Men from the extremists in the government. The problem, however, was that he was human. He had his own character flaws which would get in the way of his goals. So he cheated. He used his own abilities on himself to seal away the negative and darker aspects of his personality. And because he believed he succeeded, he subconsciously believed sealing some parts of the mind was a viable solution to some problems. Harry had been trying to figure out how Xavier could have rationalized what he did to Jean, and it seemed that because he had sealed part of his own mind, he wasn't in fact thinking rationally. Thankfully, according to the readings anyways, the only minds he did anything like that to were Jean and Forge. He accessed Logan's mind to try to fix his memories, accessed Beast's mind to walk him through gaining control over his base impulses, and accessed Aurora's mind to help her control her emotions but did nothing to affect them like he had Jean or Forge. Forge could see this as well from the readings and quickly figured out that Harry had already discovered Jean's tampering, which was why he wanted to do this in the first place. When he asked about it, Harry said he had it covered and Forge didn't bring it up again. Rather than hold it against him, Forge decided to pity the professor. He had sacrificed his own mind to become more than just a man, but in doing so he may have lost a core part of his humanity. He explained his reasoning to Danger, who also decided not to take action against the man, though she wouldn't forgive him so easily. She calculated that one day he would face the consequences of his actions, so there was no need to do anything to him. Such a man was his own worst enemy and didn't need assistance in being torn down. Once Harry understood how knowledgeable Forge was on magic, he directly brought out his ideas for modifications to the Danger Room using aspects stolen off the Room of Requirements. All they had to do was tie the AI Danger to the rune control scheme, and that would allow inhumanely precise control and near limitless possibilities. Danger understood that she could easily use what was being given to her to harm the students. It wasn't difficult to figure out ways around the core command, but she also understood she was being trusted with this power and wanted to keep that trust. Harry and Forge spent nearly every minute of the following weekend in the Danger Room, and food would often be brought to them to ensure they didn't go without. Forge showed Harry how to build what was basically a quantum computing core using vibranium and magic by introducing Harry to some of the properties of vibranium he had no idea were possible. With this, Danger would have more processing power than the rest of New York combined. Much of Forge's tech used the principles of magic, meaning he was far ahead of Harry in that field, which Harry was quite pleased with. No point in having a teacher who wasn't smarter than you. The best part was that Harry had a lot of ideas for things he wanted to make which required processors he couldn't fabricate, but using a magic processor and the adaptation technique Forge showed him, he was no longer limited as much. That, and he now had a perfect understanding for how hard light technology worked. The material required to build it didn't exist on Earth, but Harry thought of a few substitutions he could make using sonic modulation on existing materials to change their properties to match what he needed. In addition to things he stole from the Room of Requirement, Harry also included some rudimentary Time Lord math he stabilized with space expansion charms to make the inside of the Danger Room far larger than it should be. Forge had to check the numbers a few times, and though he didn't understand block transfer computations, he could figure out the scale of the effect and work with it without issue. Of course, it only worked because they used adamantium to inscribe the runes and fifth-dimensional math, which ensured the time-space wouldn't collapse. The final addition was that Harry inscribed Danger's processor with anti-magic shielding. It wasn't the same type the goblins made him swear never to spread, but since Harry already knew 5 different ways to make something magic-proof at this point, that wasn't an issue. This would ensure Danger couldn't be hacked by a technopath or a superior AI if she ever encountered one. The Tuesday after the second weekend since they started, the project was finally finished. Ping. Quest complete, Greater Danger reward, Mindscape copy. The pair weren't exactly subtle in their mad scientist montage, and everyone at the school knew they too were up to something, but no one had any clue as to what the result would be. The students and staff assembled outside the entrance to the Danger Room, and with a bit of fanfare, Forge said, "Ladies and gentlemen. And Logan, I present to you, Danger." He opened the door to reveal the same empty space everyone was familiar with. Nothing looked different or out of place. However, a moment later a group of lights appeared and gathered together to create a form which took the appearance of a beautiful Caucasian woman with silver hair. Evan was the first to break the silence. "You built a girlfriend?" A few chuckles rolled through the crowd, and Forge said flatly, "Haha, Evan. Danger is the AI who will be designing new simulations for the X-Men. Cross her at your own peril." Danger smiled and turned around, walking further into the room while motioning for others to follow her. Xavier's concerned face was noticed by Logan and Aurora, but when Forge and Harry walked into the room and the rest followed, they remained silent on it and followed in as well. As they entered, the room changed into a forest next to a lake with a log cabin set at the edge. Logan was the first to notice the difference. Harry had already learned that Logan's senses were superior to others, which was why when he first met him, his illusions had no effect. Logan could smell the real Harry among his doppelgangers. Logan took in an audible breath and examined the trees, birds, and water. Harry walked over and asked him, "How's the smell?" Without showing surprise, he answered, "Smells like nature." Evan went over to the lake and said, "This hologram looks really good." Danger smiled and walked over to him from behind and pushed him into the lake with a smile. Evan fell in with a splash and got out moments later, completely soaked. Hey, what's going on here? Isn't this a hard light hologram? Danger answered in a bell-like voice, it is at the core, but there are now layers over that which far more accurately depict reality. She walked over to Forge and kissed him on the cheek, which the blush he showed made others realize that felt like a real kiss. Kitty walked up to Danger and asked, why do you look familiar? Danger smiled and said, I choose this form myself, though I did use Ms. Monroe as a base. By human standards she is most beautiful. I hope you don't mind. Logan grunted, at least she's got good taste. Aurora smacked his shoulder and answered back, not at all. It is a pleasure to meet you. The group spent half an hour exploring and a few realized the open space was larger than the danger room should be, which confused many of the students and had Dr. McCoy jumping around various trees to analyze the realism of the forest environment. He had nothing but praise for it, complimenting the texture of the wood when he was climbing and the variety of lifelike insects he found through the canopy. After a full hour, Aurora told everyone it was dinner time and said Harry had no choice but to come along as he hadn't had dinner with the others in over 2 weeks. Harry accepted since he needed time to decompress before he started on another project and he had been neglecting the study group. He'd asked for forgiveness and hoped they wouldn't kick him out. Harry was the last to enter the dining room and as soon as he came through, everyone shouted, surprise! Happy birthday, Harry! Harry looked at the colorful streamers, the decoration, and the chocolate cake on the table, and even with all that, it still took him a moment to remember today's date was in fact his birthday. Birthdays weren't really celebrated in Camartage and Harry was always too wrapped up in various projects to celebrate it himself. Sirius threw him a party for his 12th birthday and Hermione and Neville showed up, but this was the first surprise party he'd ever had, and the second birthday party he'd experienced. Harry blew out the candles after the lame birthday song was sung aloud and Harry cut the cake to get the first slice while Beast distributed the remaining slices for everyone else. Harry was barraged with questions about the last 2 weeks, which included a lot of nonsense about if he could do the same for their rooms. Harry noticed Forget-Me-Not in the corner and went over to the table to get a slice of cake for him since Beast forgot to. However, on his way over to deliver the cake, the girl he knew as Rogue came around the corner and they walked into each other and fell over. Harry's hand touched her exposed arm, which caused her to freeze up, but Harry didn't feel anything. The room became silent and several others saw this. Rogue looked down at where Harry was holding her with wide eyes. With this, Harry had decided on his next project. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.